Hey everybody, super glad to have you here. I'm Pragmatic Addict, and I just got out of my early screening of Bullet Train, starring Brad Pitt, releasing on August 5th. So, weird way to start off this review, but the first thing I'm going to talk about in this movie, the first thing I noticed is that was the use of Japanese and English language in this movie. Now, I know that that's like a weird thing to talk about because it's like, well, how is that weird? It's not necessarily weird or strange about the movie. It's interesting because, so the movie does take place in Tokyo, and like, how you would expect from subtitles, when someone's speaking in Japanese, it'll show the English subtitles and whatnot, but in the opening credits where, it says starring, Brad Pitt, the director, the credits, that's obviously in English, but they have it both in English and Japanese, and I was just kind of like, yeah, I mean, from the fucking Bee Gees Staying Alive Japanese cover that we were getting in the trailer, that kind of fits, that makes sense. Which, yes, the movie does start off with this Japanese version of the Bee Gees Staying Alive, which, hey, yeah, it's all over the trailers. It's in there. But yes, Bullet Train. So this film does take place in Tokyo, and Brad Pitt plays an assassin named Ladybug, who is known for having just bad fucking luck. And basically, Brad Pitt's character boards this train that is full of assassins, which it is a bullet train, which, bullet train means a train going at incredibly high speed. And they're all on this train for unrelated missions to the other assassins, but basically in the beginning we see Brad Pitt's character just boarding this train to retrieve a briefcase. That's his mission, and basically once he retrieves this bag, it turns out that actually gets him reeled into this other assassin's mission, and basically in very over-the-top ways, all these guys get tangled into each other's business. So right off the bat, what I was on board with, no pun intended, immediately, was how this film sets up. It gives just enough of everything. Character development, as well as Brad Pitt's character, as well as other, characters, these other assassins. And the intro of this movie is more solely focused on these characters. And in my opinion, it gives kind of like the perfect taste of, what's in store for this movie as far as the comedy as well as the action and even like the over-the-top sequences with the violence and everything. And also, it doesn't feel entirely exactly like an intro. Within minutes you know exactly who these characters are that we're dealing with, the history behind them. Like, you see within minutes that these characters are the fucking balls. like these assassins, they're top notch, man. And while there is a lot of comedy, to the point where I'd say that this is more of a comedy in a sense, Brad Pitt's put more in this, uncomfortable spot where you can see that everybody has the kind of, goofy or dim-witted side to them, but he is the kind of, goof of the group. He is the one that, he's, the embarrassment. He's the one that has all the bad luck, the one that always fucks up, his assignments in a sense. Throughout the whole film, there's this running gag of how he describes himself as, bad luck on acid. But as far as all these characters kind of kind of coming out in this comic way, they're all displayed in their own way. And I gotta say, with all the vast talents in this film, they're each character is written to a point where they really do, they are equally given just enough as the other actors, where I would say that there isn't really even a concrete main character for a lot of this film. And, there were times where I even forgot that Brad Pitt was in this fucking movie. With all the characters and actors in this film, I do feel like not only they equally get as much, to do in this film, but in saying that they all feel like part of the same fucking movie. Now, one thing I will say is that I didn't actually know this was from the director of fucking Deadpool 2 right offhand. I was watching this movie and I'm like, this feels kind of like what you gathered from as far as brutal comedy violence goes, kind of what I got from the Suicide Squad of last year. And then yeah, I was looking it up and I'm like, oh yep, director of Deadpool 2, that makes fucking sense. But getting back to the intro and everything, now there is one thing I do want to talk about that I wasn't expect to catch me as much off guard as it did, in the sense of I was just fucking done with it kind of immediately, is that the film does these very comical origin stories, backstories to all these different assassins and characters, and while there's nothing, quote-unquote wrong with that, I did just kind of want to see this film's centerpiece, which is all these, stupid assassins boarding this fucking, high-speed fucking train all on their own missions. They have no relation to each other, and then they all end up getting caught up in each other's messes and just fucking killing each other off. That's what I wanted to see. For 2 hours and 6 minutes, I wanted to see that. And I do think that this is, a case where something just gets old very fast, is very dragged on, very over the top, and in a lot of ways, just unnecessary ways. And I do think that where the beginning act was mostly okay, this overall setup was, a lot more annoying than it should have been. Now, getting to the point of the movie where, we're talking about its tone and everything, this movie does have a lot of comedy, and I do think that, majority of the comedy does match this movie. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily good all the time. There are times where it works, and again, with the display of this movie, that being, a movie that is meant to be, ridiculously over the top and, not really taking itself all that seriously all the time. Especially in a movie like this, that can work. But it was to the point sometimes where I just felt like they didn't really give a shit. But regardless of all the flaws, I will say that, Brad Pitt, yes, being the more, notable actor of this movie, the more, standout, not only his performance, but his character, man. He is absolutely a standout in this movie in that degree. And, with him as well as, what this movie's tone is, again, the over-the-top comic action and violence, the directing in that case, I thought was a pretty fun ride as well. Now, as far as the actual directing goes, more than that, the fight sequences in this movie, I feel like they were supposed to be and should have been this, thrill ride, fast-paced, momentum, again, like a movie titled Bullet Train from this director. And it's not even that, the performance necessarily or the choreography is bad. It doesn't feel as on par with the movie's tone. It doesn't feel, again, that fast-paced or high-flying or, off the rails as this movie should be. But the movie is, jam-packed with a lot of surprises. It is a very, flairish movie. It has a lot on its sleeve to give audience. And also, now on a side note, there are a few, cameos that were a genuine surprise. Where the audience in my screening, everybody. It was to the point where it's when these characters, popped up, we were just oh, come on. Fucking really? Really? Okay, yeah, fine. That makes sense. Fair. And one thing I do want to point out that was a standout in the movie also is that even initially, before seeing this movie, we're kind of hinted at that, yes, these assassins are on this, public train, with civilians, and obviously they're trying to keep this, their profiles as low-key as possible. Basically, while they're all accomplishing their missions, trying to kill each other off, there are some sharp-witted scenes that, have to do with, them disturbing the peace, and again, trying to keep their profiles down, which I actually did think were some of the more standout scenes of the movie. And that just made me really happy. It brought a lot of flavor to the movie, and it brought a lot of, what the movie's more capable of, to the audiences. Now, getting to the later half of the film, this has nothing to actually do with it being the later half of the movie, but I just noticed that that inconsistencies and errors were just kind of stacking up more so here than in the rest of the film up to this point. I do think that the movie does keep steam throughout, more or less, but there were just a lot of things, in this later half of the film, getting toward the kind of last act, that just started to not make any fucking sense to me, and were just more instead of focusing on the scenes, and regardless of how, funny they were or, again, over the top, they did just kind of feel over the top in the wrong ways. And again, like I was saying earlier, sometimes to the point where shits are not even given. And while I did feel mixed more or less throughout the film, I will say this, the last act, I thought was pretty well where it should have been. I will go as far as to say, actually, really quickly, while I was, feeling more of the mixed review on this movie throughout, the last act, I think it fucking saved it for me. It's very climatic. There's a lot of, deep character development. There's a lot of depth and serious tones to the movie. And I thought that the film even went out pretty decent enough. I would go as far as to say that this last act, it's Bullet Train. Though with saying this, the last act is not perfect. I do think it is the most, again, deeper, most mature, structured part of the film. But, you know, the film does like to throw in its little random comedic quips that just feel very just unwelcome. You're just kind of like, okay, why? This last act was perfect. Really? Damn it. Like, and yeah, it was just kind of like a downer, because I actually do think, again, the last act is really engaging. I had a blast with the last act, and I thought that, you know, I would even go as far as to say is that it showcases some of the director's, you know, best work. Again, while it was mixed more or less on the movie throughout, the last act is generally kind of the more difficult act to nail, and weirdly enough, this movie did that, and I think that made up for a lot. Overall, the last act saved this movie for me. I'm going to give it a high mixed to positive review with a score of 5.1 out of 10. So that was my review on Bullet Train, guys. This movie doesn't release for another 3 days, and well, upon, you know, seeing this movie, I was hearing some more mixed reactions from it. Even, like, you know, before going to my screening tonight, I was messaging my buddy Tyler, and I was like, it's one of those movies that's like, as it gets closer to release, you're just kind of like, is it gonna be good? And I gotta say, like, how I was feeling initially, you know, even like while watching a lot of this movie, I kind of felt like that, where I was like, okay, it's not bad. Some parts are good. Some parts I'm just like, oh, okay, that's pretty throwaway, disposable material, more or less. But again, the last act of this film, I can't say how surprised and pleased I was that, you know, how well the last act wrapped up the movie for me. And again, that's just what it comes down to, is that, you know, this is a mixed movie more or less throughout, but the last act really does, you know, save a lot of grace for it. So guys, that is going to be my review for Bullet Train. Let me know what you thought about the review down below. Let me know if you guys are looking forward to this movie. In a couple days, guys, I will be having my reviews for the new Beavis and Butthead series on Paramount Plus, as well as Resurrection with Rebecca Hall coming out on the 5th. Look forward to those, guys, and I hope that you guys enjoyed the review. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.